Welcome to Awakening Heaven on Earth. Before we begin, take a moment to arrive. There is nothing you need to do, nothing you need to believe, and nowhere you need to go. Simply listen, contemplate, and notice what stirs and resonates within you. This is a shared space of reflection, presence, and remembrance. Now, let us begin. Welcome. In the previous episode, we listened to voices from the world's sacred traditions, and we discovered something remarkable. Across cultures, languages, and centuries, a single truth kept revealing itself: that God is not separate from creation, that the divine is not distant, that unity is not an idea, but the very ground of being. In this episode, we turn our attention outward, not away from spirituality, but into the realms of science, psychology, and lived human experience. And we ask a simple question: what happens when we observe life carefully without trying to prove anything? What patterns begin to emerge? One of the most influential voices to guide this inquiry comes from the field of psychology and from a man who lived through profound suffering. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, observed something essential about human beings. He noticed that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space we have the freedom to choose. Frankl believed that meaning is not something we invent. It is something we discover when we respond to life consciously. This insight alone hints at unity, because meaning does not arise in isolation. It emerges through relationship between inner awareness and outer reality, between what happens to us and how we meet it. Carl Jung arrived at a similar realization from a different doorway. Through his study of dreams, symbols, and mythology, Jung discovered that the human psyche is not as individual as we once believed. Beneath our personal stories, he found shared patterns, archetypes, images, and motifs that appear across cultures, religions, and eras. He called this the collective unconscious. Not a mystical claim, but an observation. Human beings share an inner world. For Jung, healing was not about becoming separate. It was about becoming whole. He called this process individuation, not the elevation of the ego, but the integration of the self. Unity here is psychological coherence, the alignment of conscious and unconscious life, the remembrance that we are more than our fragments. Science, too, has been quietly pointing in this direction. In physics, we no longer describe reality as a collection of isolated objects. We speak of fields, relationships, interactions. Particles arise from fields. Matter behaves differently when observed. Distance is not as absolute as once assumed. Even when scientists refrain from philosophical conclusions, the pattern remains. The universe is relational, interconnected, responsive. Separation appears less fundamental the deeper we look. And then there is human experience itself. Moments of awe, deep love, near-death experiences, creative flow, profound silence. Across cultures, people describe the same realization, a dissolving of boundaries, a sense of belonging, an overwhelming awareness that everything is connected. These experiences do not demand belief. They simply report what was encountered. Unity was not taught. It was felt. Taken together, psychology, science, and lived experience do not argue for unity. They reveal it. They suggest that unity is not a spiritual concept imposed on reality, but a pattern discovered when reality is observed honestly. If God is unity, and we are created in the image of God, then unity is not an abstract ideal. It is a lived truth. And the invitation before us is not to believe this, but to notice it. Now, we turn to books and voices that help us live what we've begun to recognize. Not books that argue for unity, but books that describe what life looks like when unity is remembered and embodied. These works come from different disciplines and worldviews, yet they converge on the same realization: that wholeness is not achieved by force, but by alignment. In The Universal Christ by Richard Rohr. Rohr invites us to see Christ not as a specific person or boundary marker, but as a universal pattern to be followed. Christ is not presented as an exception to humanity, as unachievable or untouchable, but as the objective of all humanity fulfilled. Here, unity is not something reserved for the spiritually elite. It is the very structure of reality. God is present in everyone and everything held in God. Rohr reminds us that spiritual maturity is not about separation or purity, but about belonging. Everyone and everything belongs. In The Perennial Philosophy by Aldous Huxley. Huxley shows us that across cultures and centuries, the same core truths keep emerging. Not because they were borrowed or imposed, but because they were universally seen and experienced. Huxley speaks of a divine ground, an underlying reality from which all forms arise. Unity here is not uniform belief. It is convergence of insight. In The Mystic Heart by Wayne Teasdale. Teasdale points toward an inner spiritual maturity, a way of honoring one's own tradition deeply, while recognizing the universal and sacred ground beneath all traditions. Unity does not erase difference. It dignifies it. And when unity is lived, it naturally expresses itself as compassion, justice, and service. It recognizes that our way is just a way, and not necessarily the way. In Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. Jung opens a window into the shared inner world of humanity. Jung shows us that the psyche is not private property. Beneath our personal stories lies a universal and collective unconscious, a shared field of symbols and archetypes that shape our dreams, myths, and meaning. Individuation for Jung was never about becoming separate. It was about becoming whole. A life aligned with the deeper self, rather than fragmented by fear, persona, or shadow. Unity here is psychological clarity. The individual soul remembering itself as part of a greater whole. In The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. Covey brings this same truth into daily life. Though being from a particular faith background, Covey intentionally grounded his work in universal principles found across wisdom traditions. He distinguished between personality techniques and character ethics, between surface behavior and inner alignment. Covey observed that effectiveness emerges naturally when life is lived from principle-centered awareness. When the inner world is unified, the outer world begins to flow and work. Unity here becomes practical. It shapes relationships, leadership, stewardship, and responsibility. In the book The Field by Lynn McTaggart, we see a scientific reflection of this same pattern. Drawing on research from physics, biology, and consciousness studies, McTaggart describes reality as deeply interconnected, not as isolated parts, but as relational events arising within a unified field. While science remains careful and humble in its claims, the observation is clear. Separation is not as fundamental as we once believed. Here, unity is not a mystical belief. It is structural. In the Sermon on the Mount by Emmett Fox, Fox returns us again to inner alignment. Jesus' teachings are revealed not as moral demands, but as a mystical psychology. As inner perception changes, outer experience follows. Unity is lived inwardly, then expressed outwardly. And in Edgar Cayce on Christ Consciousness by Charles Thomas Cayce, Christ is described not as a historical exception, but as a state of awareness. A consciousness of unity available to every soul. Unity here is evolutionary. Humanity remembering itself. Taken together, these books do not tell different stories. They describe the same movement. An alchemical transmutation from fragmentation to wholeness, from isolation to belonging, from fear to love. They remind us that unity is not something we impose on life. It is what life reveals when we stop resisting it. Living unity does not mean withdrawing from the world. It means engaging it differently, listening more deeply, responding more gently, choosing clarity over conflict. Unity lived is often quiet, but it is powerful. It shows up in how we treat ourselves, how we treat others, and how we participate in the world. If God is unity, and we are made in the image of God, then unity is not a future destination. It is a present truth. The invitation of these books is simple, though not easy. To live as if this were true, and to notice what begins to change when we do. As we come to a close, there is nothing you need to carry, nothing you need to remember, and nothing you need to make of what you've heard. Allow what has resonated to remain, and let the rest pass gently away. You are welcome to return whenever you feel drawn. Until then, may you walk in love, joy, peace, presence, and rest in unity. Thank you for listening.